Shal is an associate professor and director of graduate degree programs in the management department of the Saunders College of Business at RIT. She teaches negotiations to graduate students and conducts executive training on negotiations. I personally have had the chance to attend one of her graduate negotiations classes, and I can tell you I learned so much valuable information, so I hope you all do too. Shal, thank you so much for sharing your negotiations knowledge with us today. Take it away.
Thank you, Natalie. So as you will notice, I've titled the presentation Negotiating Job Offer as opposed to just a salary. Salary is part of job offer, but we'll talk about negotiating better job offer in a more holistic way today, and why it's not a good idea to just focus on salary. The way we'll do is we'll talk about why job offers and not just salary, what are the issues with that. Then I'll cut to the chase and give you sort of 10 pointers of that you can walk away using that can be used in negotiating any kind of job offers. After those 10 pointers, depending on the time, I will talk about a tool that can actually be used in a very real way to implement some of the steps that we talk about. So what happens when you focus just on salary or similar year one items? It triggers what we call distributive mindset. What that does is tendency to view issues as being similarly valued. It triggers the mentality where it's you as in you versus the employer. So it's you versus the employer, and more for you means less for the employer, and that is more likely to happen when you focus just on salary, because salary is a contentious issue, and if you focus on salary, the more you ask, probably less for employer. The other issue with that is it's a trap. It's a trap in the sense there is a tendency in all of us to focus on some items that are very vivid. So high prestige status items such as high salary from a top consulting firm. But then what happens, because we are now focused on items that are very salient and vivid, you overlook or undervalue less flashy, dull, but equally important that can increase the value of your package. Items such as what are going to be job responsibilities, flexible work schedules, paid time off, things like that. This ties into, I have a point above that says there was a recent Gallup poll in 2013 which surveyed 230,000 employees and found in 142 countries and found that only 13% of employees felt engaged by their job, meaning it's not hard to find a job, but it is difficult to get fulfillment and satisfaction out of jobs. You want to negotiate job offers in a way that sets you up for long-term fulfillment, and as a result, you'll be well compensated over time. So those are the two goals. I'm not taking salary off the table. You will be well compensated. You will be well compensated if you can negotiate job offers that are more fulfilling, that lead you to a more fulfilling job. So how do you do that? I think that's the question that's on everybody's mind. And so we'll cut the chase, and I will give you sort of 10 quick pointers. I can move the slide. Okay. So the very first thing, overarching point that I want us to adopt, which is more of a mindset, I want us to redefine you. So who is you in negotiation? You is not just you. If you can redefine you as inclusive as possible, meaning redefining you to include your employer in it, what does that do? That takes the focus away from just the salary and distributive mentality, which is you versus employer. Now you have to ask more from an employer, and as a result, they will be less better off. It moves you into a place where negotiation becomes a joint problem solving. And so you have an issue, now you want to solve a problem with that. So how do we get around that? So the first thing I want us to focus on is you want to share your interest honestly and sincerely, but not position. So what do I mean by that? So I was advising this one person on a negotiation of a job offer, and he was not from this country, he was from another country. For him, time off, paid time off was very important. So 1 month vacation time was hugely important. And he was negotiating with this employer. Everything was great, but was getting stuck on this because the employer couldn't possibly give that. And he came to me and he said, I really, really want to accept this job, but it's the pay, I want 1 month off. I said, my question to him was, why do you want 1 month off? I want to be able to visit my family. And I said, well, go and tell them that as opposed to negotiating for or paid time off or vacation, tell them I want time to be able to visit my family, which is the underlying interest. And when he shared that, they came back and said, well, you can work on our location from that country. It will not be time off, but you can spend a month, month and a half in our off-site location in his country. And that worked out perfect because he was really not looking for vacation. He was really looking for to be able to go and visit his parents. So the difference between interest and position is that once you take a position that I want time off, then you're forcing the other person to take a position on that by response yes or no. If you share your interest, which is your underlying reason for asking, then there are multiple ways that interest can be met, as opposed to just one way, which is vacation. So if higher salary is important to you, and that's fine, but I think it is more important to focus on why that is important, so focus on the underlying interest. The other part when you do that in sharing your interest, you want to aim for likability. If people who are liked more tend to get more, or so the goal of negotiation is to be persuasive, and one way in which you can be very persuasive is be likable. At the end of the negotiation, you want to be liked perhaps even more than when you started the negotiation. So, which is why it ties into share your interest honestly and sincerely as opposed to holding down a position. The other thing you want to do in negotiation is, which is why I said focus, as opposed to focusing on, even though you're focused on year one items or salaries, it's a good idea to adopt a long-term horizon. You have to remember, this is not the last negotiation you will have with them. You will have a series of negotiations. So what's not negotiable now probably could be negotiable 6 months later or a year later. So if they're not giving you the salary raise right now, what about in another 6 months, in a year? If they're not giving you the location that you desire right now, what about in 6 months? If you build in that time, and it gives you a little more flexibility in terms of what you can negotiate. So as opposed to being focused on now and present, and adopt more long-term horizons. So this is also very important. So know yourself, know your interest in terms of what's important to you, but you also have to know your employer before you negotiate. Know them, know what they stand for, know what their constraints are, know what they care for, know what their value. Basically do a lot of homework in what they stand for. So here is a story on that will sort of illustrate this point. So there was a professor who was a philosophy professor who was negotiating a job offer. So the university made a job offer to this person, and the candidate shifted into a mode and said, well, now I have to go into my negotiating mode. And goes into negotiating mode and lists down a whole bunch of things that she wanted. And she was, in her mind, she was being flexible because in the email she said, one, email was a bad idea. But besides the email, she lists down the laundry list of things and says, well, I understand not all is you can come through on all items, but I wanted to see. So in her mind, she said, well, this is what people do. When you're made an offer, you go back and you ask for things, more things, and that's how it goes. The offer was rescinded. Now, I agree that's very unlikely to happen in day-to-day circumstances, that the offer will be rescinded. So whether that was a good idea or not, that's a separate discussion. But the offer was rescinded. Why was it rescinded is more important. It was rescinded because of the kind of things that this person was asking. She was asking for stuff like paid maternity leave, sabbatical, or time off to work on your research before tenure, or summer support, time off during the summer. What it led them to believe is, well, she is not fit for us. She's more suited for a research university. So they concluded, well, she's not a good fit, and rescinded the offer. So I think it is very important for you to know what your employer really cares for and values before you make those requests. As it's okay to ask for more, but if you don't understand what is it that they really value, if it's an organization which really has 8 to 5 formal and you're looking for flexible time, probably you're not going to get it. So then the question is, why should you ask? Because asking would lead them to believe you really don't understand them that well. So it's important to do your work, do your lot of homework on who the employer is, what they care, what their constraints are, what they can do for you. You should absolutely ask for what you need. For that, you have to know why you're asking what you're asking. So know your needs, ask for what you need, but it is more important for you to provide explanation for your request. So, which ties to an earlier point in terms of sharing your interests. People, when you provide them more explanation, they are more likely to comply with your request, as opposed to when you just make a list. So this person, this philosophy professor, came down with a laundry list of things, did not provide an explanation for why she's asking for the things that she's asking. And so that's the one thing. And
Shal?
Yes.
We do have a question that just came in.
Sure.
One question from David. And David asks, doesn't the long-term view equally mitigate in favor of taking a hard line as compromise? The presently agreed result is also the baseline for all future negotiations.
Yes, if I'm understanding your question is basically if you negotiate a higher salary, then that's the baseline for future negotiations. So the higher salary you can get at this point is will be the baseline. Yes, that is true. I will again go back to this. Employees are not out there to get you. They really are not. In most cases, they're not out there to get you. So if you make a reasonable request, provide a good explanation and for why you are asking, you will come back with a better salary. Again, so there are two things, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So long-term view is a more holistic view. So it allows you to negotiate for things that are more than just the salary. It can give you tools that will eventually result in a better salary or better compensation packages. So it's not just the time, it's also the issues that you put on the table. We'll talk a little bit more about them, but that's a good question. I think what is that baseline is also a question you want to ask. So there is no end to more. Or, right, I always tell students, I mean, or executives, there is no end to more. You can keep going more. Or, but at some point of time, you have to calibrate what that more is reasonable. And if the concern is, again, the concern is, if your peers are earning more than you, then the concern is fairness. Then you share that information with them. I believe others in my position are earning so and I don't want to be lagging. Can we talk a little bit more about it? So this is not to say that you want to be underpaid starting off, but what is that more? What's the upper line of that? I hope that makes sense. Again, please feel free to send questions if you have. I'll try and address them as we go along. So the next point in terms of what you should do. So you should accept no when you're being told no. It's not a haggling contest. So if somebody comes and tells you, well, this is non-negotiable, okay, I think the important part is, important aspect is accept no, but ask for explanation. So don't just accept no. Because you want to understand your employer before you negotiate it, in terms of, and understand their employer even during their during the negotiation in terms of the context, in terms of their constraints. So what's the explanation? Why ask? I understand that you don't, this is non-negotiable, but I just wanted to see, are there situations or circumstances in which you will say yes? As what if, under what circumstances, why so? Because I see, again, provide explanation. I see others in a similar job having similar, this kind of compensation, so why not you? So ask, again, accept no, but ask for explanation. Here's other thing, other important issue that we should talk about, and that I would like to mention is you want to keep multiple issues on tables simultaneously, as opposed to going one after another. So now I got this, now I can go back and ask for this. No, that's a very, very bad idea. So you want to keep all that is important to you all on the table at the same time. Now, why do you? But while doing that, you want to clearly communicate what do you care for more. So then the employer can address what's most important to you, as opposed to, and then figure out other ways, well, I don't have to really worry about that. So the philosophy professor example, she came back with 8 things, didn't indicate what's more important to her, and it's all is, it can't be that everything is equally important. And so you have to decide what is most important to you, what's okay, mediocre importance, and what's least important, and communicate your preferences to your employee. Remember, you're both on the same team. They want you. They like you. So if you tell them what you really care for, then they will work with that. But if everything is equally important, I'm sitting here and thinking, oh my goodness, everything is equally important. I can't possibly give this person everything. I really want him or her on the staff, but I can't possibly give. It creates an environment where I think, oh, maybe this person I can't get. If I get into that mode, if I start to believe as an employer that you are too difficult to get, I'm not going to do much for you. You do not want to create that you are sort of difficult to get game. So you want to communicate your preferences. This is really important. Again, with an explanation why that is important. The other thing you want to do is prepare for difficult questions and do not lie about anything in your response. So here is an example, right? What if you're asked about your previous sort of a compensation package, or the reasons for why you are leaving, or if you have moved a lot in your career, if you get asked, so you seem to be moving a lot. So then what's the question? So if you're asked about that, here again I would say share your concerns and try and understand what is it that they want to know by asking that question. And so if they're asking for your previous compensation, is the concern, you can share your previous compensation, but also your concern if you were paid low, that I was not particularly happy with my previous compensation package, but I'm happy to share with you who followed up with a question. I wanted to understand how you use that information, or how does it affect your decision making. Again, asking and understanding, trying to understand what the other party's concerns are, And lying is not a good idea in almost any case. Again, it's not the last negotiation you will have. So bring them into understanding your concerns. One of the things is you want to stay on the table, which ties a little bit into that you want to be as flexible as possible. You want to be flexible and you want to give that flexibility to your employer. Some of the things that we talked about earlier get at that. And by putting multiple issues on the table and indicating your priority, you are being flexible and you are allowing the employer to be flexible in how he or she or they are going to meet your needs. Is all of that that we talked about above will help you to get a better compensation package, but I cannot underemphasize the importance of the last point, and which of all the things is the most important one. You want to treat this job negotiation as a place to set yourself up for long-term success. While salary does, don't get me wrong, salary does predict, early starting salary does predict how much you're going to make, but at the same time, you have to think of job more holistically. What do you need to make you more marketable? And those are the things that are sort of easier to ask, and employers, it puts you in a different frame of mind. So what are the job responsibilities? What are the growth opportunities? What assignments will you be working on? Will you be moving around the location? What do you need to make you more marketable as opposed to just focusing on the salary aspect of it? There are a couple of things that happen as a result of that. One, it gets you into the you mentality, a little you being more inclusive, because now you are asking for things that is going to help employer also, right? Employers want you to get new skills. They want you to grow in their organization. And so it moves the mindset away from issues that are distributive, more for me, less for them, to issues that are more or joint value gains. So employer benefits as a result of you acquiring those skills. You benefit by being more marketable and as a result arriving at better compensation packages. So it serves that purpose in terms of how you create, put other issues on the table and make yourself more marketable and seek for more fulfillment. Job offers are not just, they should be treated as a means to create better opportunities for you. The last thing that I would say, which is not up here, you never ever want to put a threat on the negotiation. That is, if you do this for me, then I'll come or not. By doing that, there's a 50% probability, probabilistically, the person is going to come back and say, well, I'm not going to do for you. Unless you're prepared for that no, you should not put that on table. Again, this is not holistic. This is not you versus me. This is more of a joint and value game. So those were sort of a quick 10-pointers in terms of what you should or should not do in negotiations. And so, and I can talk about one particular tool that is often used in negotiations and is very helpful in getting at some of the issues, especially the multiple issues on table and negotiating for long-term success. So that is, one of them is to create a scoring system. What does that do? It allows you to compare multiple equivalent job offers, not equal, equivalent. So they vary on the dimensions on what you're getting, but they are equivalent in the value that they provide you. And I'll give you an example of that. What also it does, it prevents you, it prevents you from undervaluing or overvaluing non-quantifiable aspects of job offers. So remember we talked, I mentioned about how there's a tendency to focus on some things that are vivid, salary and year one items, bonuses and things like that, or merit raises. non-quantifiable, vacations, flexibility in job responsibilities, work process, they're non-quantifiable. In the absence of a score, people tend to either undervalue them, mostly undervalue them, because they are not right there in front of you. Or if something is really important, like for this person, a vacation was important, so really overvaluing it. Oh, that's really, really important for me. But you don't know that. Vis-a-vis other issues, how important it is unless you attach some numbers to it. So creating a scoring system helps get around those issues. So how do you create a scoring system? I'll give you an example of a scoring system, but let me just go through the steps. You want to list all issues, not a laundry list, but things that are most important and relevant to you, that are likely to come up your negotiations. So think of, when I say be creative in doing so, think of things that may not necessarily come up. So who will you work with, whether there will be a job rotation, whether there will be transfers, what if you take time off. So all of those come into play. You want to prioritize each issue, allows you to communicate your priority. You want to assign weight to that priority. For each issue, you want to also list different options, so anticipate possible outcomes for each issue and assign points or dollar value to each issue. This is a system that's been created by Harvard, but I'll show you an example of this. I just use the items that come up most often, but I put time off, vacation, and location, child care, if that's important to you, anything that's important to you, I will put that issue as an option. So issue salary, different options in there. So you have 80,000, 75,000, 70,000. You have location, retirement. So I put 3 issues. Scale of 1 to 100, 100%, they should add up to 100. So salary is clearly 50%, I do care for it. There's location, 30%, retirement package, 20%. So I have different options within those. And within those options, I assign different weights. The 100 points for if I get 80,000. Clearly, that's the most desirable. China is most desirable location. On stocks, more stocks versus cash, probably company doing really well and growing, more important to me than other options. Now, if you, so this gives you have to do this before negotiation, not during, before negotiation. So I'm comparing 2 options. Now, I've exaggerated the difference, but you can play around with the numbers and see how 2 packages can be very, very close. So the first package where I get everything that not everything that I want, I got highest on salary, second option for location, and the first option retirement, 88 points. And the second one is more of 82 points. Clearly, I care more of number 1 option. I think you can play with this tool more ways than one, but I think the importance of this system is it helps you to keep multiple issues on the table. It helps you to prioritize and communicate the priority. And if employer comes back with different offers or different combinations, then it allows you to compare those offers in a meaningful way and prevents you from focusing on some things that are very salient to you and prevents you from undervaluing or overvaluing non-quantifiable aspects of your job offer. So those were some of the things that I wanted to talk about.
Shal?
Yes.
We do have one more question.
Yes.
This is from Prescott. Prescott asks, how would you apply these negotiation tactics when you're in a small company where, management and owners are losing profit?
Okay. So that's a good question. I will go back. We always talk about in negotiation, and I want everybody to sort of think of negotiation is not more for me. If you adopt a long-term view, so for example, right now owners are losing money. I'm hoping that they will not continue to lose money, and that if they do, then you will probably find another job. But they're losing money now. So it's okay for you to work with them now on a salary package that makes sense given their constraints. You have to understand their constraints. They can't give you more. If they can't give you more, then either you have to go get another job, but if you want to work with them, so if they can't give you no more now, that's okay, but what about future? So can you go back and say, well, I understand you're making loss now, and I'm willing to work with you now, but what about when that goes away? Will you compensate for some of the salary that I may have lost as a result of that in one-time bonus or one-time payoff? You can absolutely talk about those things. But again, you have to understand the constraints that they have and long-term focus. So that was a good question. Understand their concerns, where they're coming from. Accept no, but ask why and under what circumstances can you put yourself in those circumstances and ask. Basically, in your case, I would say a long-term. Seek out a package when the loss go away, and I'm hoping that losses will go away. Okay. Thank you. Couple of, I will reiterate a few things. You want to negotiate for things that puts you in a better position for compensation long-term. Having said that, not unfairly paid at this point of time, so you want to start good, absolutely, but I don't want you to lose sight of what's good long-term. That means tools and things that you will need for you to be compensated well over time. If you're more satisfied, employees who are more satisfied and more engaged in their job, they tend to do well and they tend to make more money also. So you want to aim for satisfaction in job and think about what do I need to be more satisfied and fulfilled in the job. So adopt a learning mindset, very important. Learn about yourself before going into negotiation, but even more importantly, learn about the other, your employee. I think it's a good place to start, that your employer is not out to get you, and they want to hire you, they like you. So if they're not giving you something that you want, there is a reason, and solicit and try and understand what that reason might be. It could be that they really, really want you, but internally you already are amongst the higher paid starting up. So they don't want to breed inequity internally, and you want to be cognizant of that. You don't want employees to be resenting you. So people talk, even though salaries are confidential, figuring out that, well, he or she is being hired at a much higher salary than I was hired at. So adopt a learning mindset in a sense to understand your employer, know them, understand their concerns. And I would absolutely recommend, if there is one thing I could recommend that will allow you to keep some of these issues in place, to create a scoring system a priori before going into negotiations and use it. So those were some of the things that I wanted to share with you all. I'm happy to take more questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Shal. We do have a bunch of questions on the line right now. Some of them I would like to hold off on because right now we have some polling questions for you guys, and I think that this might help answer a lot of the questions that we have in right now. So we're going to go ahead and start with poll question number 1, and we can discuss that a little bit. So please take a look. You can see the question is, an employer tells you that the company can't offer you the salary you want. How do you respond? So for A, you've got kindly refuse the offer and look for a different job. B, continue the negotiation with a focus on non-monetary items. C, accept the offer with the plan to have another salary negotiation further into your employment. So please choose one of these and submit your answer, and we will take a look at what everybody says is the correct one. All right, so let's take a look at what everyone said. All right, sorry, 1 second, everyone. We're having small technical difficulties. There we go. All right, so it looks like we had 55 people say that B is the correct answer. Is that correct?
Sort of, yes. If the employer tells you that salary is not negotiable, then accept, yes, you should absolutely continue with the negotiation. I will add to that. You should ask. If your request is reasonable, then you should ask. Why not? And offer an explanation. Well, I asked because of these reasons, but you're saying no, so you must really have a reason. I just want to understand why. In some circumstances, it might make sense for you to accept the offer with a plan to have negotiations in the future. That also would make sense. And if salary is really important and they're saying no, so in some sense. But I think the B option is the most, but ask why. Make reasonable requests and stick with them.
All right, we've got 2 more polling questions for you guys, and they are going to get a little harder. So this next question says, an employer asks about your salary at your previous job, but you don't wish to disclose it. How do you respond? And this is a question that I've seen coming in a lot. We addressed it a little bit, so see if you can choose the correct answer. Should you, A, tell the employer your previous salary was larger than it was, B, tell the truth about your previous salary, or C, deflect the question? All right, let's see what everyone said. Okay, so the most popular answer was, again, B, tell the truth.
So here, again, this is, I always say negotiation is part science and part art. So either one of these could go, or could work. I think what is more important, you could tell the employer that you were, if you know your current salary, you actually were making more, and you seek an explanation why you're not getting as much as you were in the earlier job. You could tell your previous salary also, or can sort of deflect. Deflect the question would be the last option. I would not recommend doing that, because when you deflect the answer, you're trying to avoid it, and you do avoid it. Again, you are both on the same side, so you want them to understand it. I think what you want to do is, even if you're assuming you were paid low, you want to understand how they use that information. I think that's important. And oftentimes I will advise that you could come back if you think it's going to be, based on the conversation, you think it's going to be used against you in some way. That means they will lowball you in some sense, and which employers shouldn't do, but if they do, then you want to come back with a question. So this is what I was paid. I know that's low. I was wondering what's the average or what's the range that you pay at my position with a person with my kind of experience, skills, and background. So what you're doing 2 things. You are maintaining the sort of a information exchange and power balance. So now you have a piece of information. So if you were paid $40K in your earlier job, and that's really low, and you tell them that, and you feel that they might be using that information to lowball you, now that you've asked them what's the average in your company or what's the range, and if it is 60 to 80, it would be very hard for them to pay you anything less than 60 or lowball you really at that point. So if you have that concern, then you should ask, how will that information be used? And if you are convinced that that's going to be used against you, then come back and ask for an information that will displace, basically what that is doing, displace the anchor that has been set by your low salary, because low salary is sort of setting up an anchor. You want to displace it. So either one or two could work. One more favorably, second also, but third I would recommend no, in general. Don't deflect the question, address it. Which is why I goes prepare for those questions in advance and be honest.
All right, we've got one final question for you all, and then we're getting back to your audience questions. So the employer proposes an offer much lower than you expected. How should you respond? A, communicate that the offer is much lower than your expectation and accept. B, communicate that it's much lower than you expected and refuse. Or C, communicate it's much lower than you expected and continue to negotiate. All right, and the answers are coming in. The top answer was C, continue to negotiate. Is that right?
This is one of those questions, yes, absolutely. You want to communicate very clearly that offer is much lower than your expectation, but you are open and flexible in talking. So yes, and you also want to, I will go as far as saying if it's really, really low, then you want some explanation why that is low. And so joint mentality, the way I would do it is if you are offended, I'm not saying that you are, if you are offended by the offer, then I'd say I was slightly offended by the offer, but I know you want to hire me, I know that, and I want to work here, so I just want to understand and where that offer came from or how that numbers play up, and maybe I'm missing some information. So you want to communicate your stance very sort of clearly in the sense that I'm not happy with the offer, and so then you put the other person in a position to at least be open, open and understand why they gave you the offer they gave you. So, so yes, that was the correct answer for that one.
All right, so now we're going to go to audience questions. If you have a question that you haven't yet submitted, please do so in the chat box. We have one question from Erin that I know is very dear to your heart, Shal. Erin asks, how do women negotiate differently than men, and what advice do you have for women to negotiate more successfully?
Yes, it is. I talk a lot about gender differences in general, and I've given workshops on that. So I'll give you sort of a shorter answer. Yes, you're right. There is still a gender gap. For every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 0.78 cents. So there is clearly a gender gap. What is interesting, the gender gap, the research on gender and negotiation would show that gender itself doesn't explain the difference in the outcome. What that really means that if you take away some of the situational constraints, women and men can be equally good. In fact, women tend to be better negotiators, but when? Not for themselves. They are poor self-advocates. But when they negotiate on behalf of others, they tend to be some equal, gender differences go away. So gender don't make a difference. They're not, gender itself doesn't explain. What advice will I give women? And how? So your question is, how do they negotiate differently than men? They negotiate differently in men by focusing on different things. So I think two things explain differences. One is the structural ambiguity. So if there is lack of transparency in how you negotiate job offers, and the rules are not clear, the process is not clear, women tend to be not negotiating as well because there is ambiguity. Men are able to leverage that ambiguity and can negotiate better. So what do you do? So what you do is you seek information in terms of how negotiation will take place. So if you were to negotiate for salary, if you were to ask for additional resources, what's the process? How do the people do it? And who will you ask? To your supervisor, ask them to provide clarity, but who else will you ask? You'll ask men, not women. Women have a tendency to go into their own network, which is women, and as a result, get information that puts them in a situation. Women tend to be low paid, so if you're going to go to women, you'll get a different calibration point. So you should go and seek information from men. And that's one thing I would do. The other thing that has been shown in research that you should focus on you, but you should sort of use more of a, there was a study that came out that talked about how women, if they use communal language, which is we, they tend to get better outcomes. So think of, if you're looking for resources, then think of ways how that resources will benefit the company too. So, and anchor it around that. So if you're requesting resources or additional staff line in marketing or staff, say that you're requesting it for yourself, that will help you do your job better, but anchor it around the company. So if I get that additional line, I'll be able to manage so many accounts better, and as a result, company will actually gain so much in profits. So I think it becomes even more important. This is a good practice in general, but I think it is a better practice for it's a better practice for women, and it tends to benefit women more than men. So women should absolutely use those. So those were quick pointers I could give on women.
All right, we do have some other questions along that similar line. One is, how do you respond to questions about future family plans?
So I'm going to take a shot at understanding what I think you're asking here. Future, that is something that I would recommend having a conversation about with your employers at the time of joining. And I did. When there are, again, you have to remember, when there is lack of policy or a clear structure in place, women tend to get disadvantaged. If there is not a clear rule and process guiding how women who are pregnant or maternity leave or how much of leave is going, you tend to be disadvantaged because there is ambiguity around. Women don't tend to do as well in ambiguous situations. So you want to seek clarity at the time of negotiating job offers. By creating hypothetical situations, what if? If it's important to you, then it will be important to your employer. And if it's not important to your employer, then it's telling you something about the place that it is to work at, right? If something is really important to you and your employer comes back, well, we don't do that, then that's telling you some information about them. But the timing of it is important. At the time of negotiating your job offer, at the time of entry, you want to seek clarity of how it is done. What's the precedent, what's the process, and talk about your plans. Share your interests that I would probably, but all of this is done when? Post-offer, once you have the offer, not before that, not before that. And again, this is a dialogue. So I would seek clarity on it. And you be resourceful. Ask for people who are working in the company. See if you can find a connection, what's done. Again, do your homework. Figure out what's going on before. Not everything has to be asked indirectly.
All right, we've got a question from Steve. Steve asks, what if the employer tells me that they do not negotiate?
So then you accept no. Negotiate. You should not just negotiate just because you have to negotiate. If you really care about that job and you really want that job, accept no, and that's okay. But ask why. Under what circumstances that no will change? Has it ever changed in the past? Can you do anything to change? Sometimes a company, this happens a lot of times at the early on entry-level positions, when a company is hiring, for example, a company will come to campus and hire a bunch of students and from a discipline, they will not negotiate. They will not negotiate because it doesn't make sense for them. They want to hire everybody for the fairness sake at the same level. It does not make sense and to negotiate them. And negotiate, think of job offer holistically, negotiate for tools that put you in a position to get a better compensation over time. So take it or leave it. If that comes in, think about what you really want. Do you really want to work? Do you think you're being fairly treated? If fairness is a concern, then you should go. You'll be miserable there. And accept no, but understand why no. You're on the same side, right? You're not sitting across from each other on the table.
All right. Another question: when bringing up salary or compensation, and you're negotiating for this job offer, should you start talking about salary and your base salary that you will accept, and then list other items after that, or talk about the total compensation package, salary, bonus, stocks together?
So it goes back to the whole issue of putting multiple issues on the table, but indicating preferences and priorities, right? So I would recommend putting multiple issues on the table, but tie them together. When I say tie them together, that means if they're not giving you the salary that you want, then you should get bonus that you want, or you should get time off that you want. So you're tying the issues together as opposed to keeping them separate. What will happen if you keep them separate, you will get something on one issue but not really on other, and they will come back and say, well, we just gave you the salary that you want. Now the other things don't matter. I mean, how much more? So I would absolutely recommend put everything together in a sort of a compensation package, and that will include your responsibilities and everything. And in your mind, you should have prioritized and weighted each option, and then go back to them. So if they go down on salary that you desire, then they will go up on some other issues. So no, keep all the issues on the table, but communicate your priorities. What do you really care for? You really want salary. Why do you want salary more? Maybe you have loans, maybe you have mortgage. I don't know what that reason is, but all issues on the table. Well, if you put one issue at a time, it tends to create a mentality you versus you, me. So it becomes more distributive and competitive. But keeping issues together and tie them together, it makes it more problem solving and more less distributive.
All right, we do have a question from Tracy. Tracy is in a situation where her employer has promised her a raise and has continually not given that raise. So what do you do when you're in a situation like that? How do you negotiate to make sure that you get what you were promised?
Okay, so so there are a couple of things. It's not just the raise itself. I think the issue is also that you're being strung along, that you've been promised and you're not. So there are two things. One is the raise itself, but the process through which it is offering. So I would, even in this situation, I would recommend that you share your concerns, share your problems. So if I were you, I would say, well, we can talk about the raise, but for me the issue is I've been promised for 2 years. Now, how am I supposed to infer this? What does this really mean? Are you going to give me raises, or are there other constraints that preventing you from getting a raise? So I will share my interest, which is I don't like being strung along. In other words, that I think it's sending me a message that I'm not sure how to interpret. So can you help me make sense of it? And why am I not getting raised? Is there an issue? Is there a concern with my performance? Is there a concern on, is there a constraint on the side of the department? What is it? Because you've been promised. So in negotiation we call it, you displace what the other person is saying, but he's stringing you along, ask for an explanation why in a very candid way, and then put also the raise. Now, when I ask for raise, you've been asking raise for 2 years, so keep in mind the cumulative aspect of it, and I would go with that. So for 2 years, if you had given me raise 2 years ago, it would have been that much, but you have not given me for 2 years. I'm not saying that you should give me all of that now, to indicate the flexibility, but that's what it would have been. So it gets him to see what effect it would have had on your salary if you had gotten the raise twice. But I think there are two issues that you would address in your negotiation. One is the process issue, which is the fairness, stringing along. The second issue is the cumulative effect of salary. So ask him to help or her to help you make sense of what's going on and that you're not liking it.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. There was a question about being gone, specifically about if you're on a long-term maternity leave. And I think that this can apply to anyone who is on a long leave for a period of time for a number of reasons. How can you expect the salary negotiations to be different?
I think the salary negotiation in this case would be different in a way because you can't negotiate specific package. I think what you should talk about is what all will be negotiable when you come back. And you should talk about some rules in general that you will, in some sense, in general rules, if your salary is at X level or your pay is at X level, will you come back and start at least at the same level or more, probably not more, but at least at the same level. You can talk about the positions. Will you start at the same position when you come back on a long term? So what you will come back to should be negotiated, and as opposed to exactly the terms on contract. So in the future, what will you come back to is what is going to. So it's, in some sense, it's not going to be all that different. It's just building in a little bit of uncertainty. I think the long-term period will also, negotiation will take into account if it's 1 year, 2 years, what if it goes beyond 2 years or 3 years? Then you have to think from the organization point of view also what's going on in their mind, because they'll now have to hire somebody to replace your skills. So think what their constraints are, but you want to nail down as much as possible what you will come back to. Is what I would say.
All right, well, that is all the time that we have for questions today. I know that we did have quite a few more questions submitted, so I apologize that we could not get to those. But if you would like to email them to ritalum@rit.edu or tweet them to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, we can make sure that we direct your questions to Shal and they can be answered another time. Note that all participants will receive an email from us within the next week with a link to today's webinar recording. Many thanks to you, Shal.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for taking time out of your day to be with us. If you'd like to, please join us again on August 26th as our very own Robert Constantine talks about wills and trusts, which is really another topic most people don't talk about much, but I think is something we all think about. So I hope that you will join us then to get your questions answered about that important topic.